Let all the earth be silent.
Silence saved her soul. But silence could have cost her peace.
Are you the king of the Jews?
There are moments when silence is the holiest thing you can offer, and others when silence itself becomes a sin God cannot overlook. If you've ever said something you regret, or stayed quiet when you should have spoken, then today we have something important to talk about. A simple like, a small subscription. To you it may seem like nothing, but to us it's a quiet encouragement, a sign that you want to keep sitting here with us, to keep having these whispered conversations about faith, about silence, and about the words that must be spoken. So then, when should you stay silent and when must you speak? The answer might change your soul. Let's begin. He insulted you. She disrespected you. They lied behind your back. And suddenly, your heart pounds, your breath shortens. You brace for war. The words load themselves, sharp, swift, satisfying. But are they holy? Jesus flipped tables. Yes, he burned with righteous anger, but even then he spoke with control. Never in sin, never to wound. Proverbs 29:11 says, "Fools give full vent to their rage, but the wise bring calm in the end." This verse doesn't flatter, it separates. It tells the truth. Some explode, some choose restraint, and only one brings peace. Let's be honest, when anger takes the wheel, wisdom often gets thrown out the window. That's why James 1:19 tells us, "Be quick to listen, slow to speak, slow to become angry." Because our anger doesn't produce God's righteousness, it only produces regret. And so, when the urge to lash out rises, when your soul trembles to speak, the sacred choice is not to shout, but to stop. Silence is not weakness, it is worship. You're not giving up, you're giving over. You're surrendering not to the injustice, but to the just one. And that takes more strength than 10,000 words ever will. Jesus stood before his accusers, bloody, mocked, falsely charged, and he said, nothing. Why? Because his dignity wasn't threatened, his peace wasn't based on their opinions. He knew the Father would speak for him, and so he waited. He waited in silence. Can you? Because, friend, the enemy would love for you to say something permanent in a moment of heat, to sever a relationship, to stain your witness, to damage your soul, just to feel heard, but silence. Spirit-filled, God-centered silence snatches that weapon from the enemy's hand. You see, some of us learned to shout before we could walk. We grew up among slammed doors, explosive dinners, words that burned for years, and now that fire lives in us. But silence can do what shouting never could. It can heal. Not the silence of pride, but the silence of surrender. It says I could speak, but I won't. I could fight, but I trust. That's silence. It doesn't mean the pain didn't happen. It means you gave it to God. And in that moment, you resemble Christ more than you realize. Because when he was struck, he didn't strike back. When he was accused, he didn't explain. He was not afraid. He was not ashamed. He was silent because he was secure. Are you? Do you trust that God sees the insult? Do you believe he hears the whispers? Do you trust him enough to let your silence be your sacrifice? Because sometimes, the holiest sound in the room is the one not spoken. It may protect a marriage. It may save a friendship. It may preserve your soul. So next time your anger rises and your tongue readies its strike, ask yourself, is this a sword I should draw or a moment where my silence becomes worship? You are doing fine. A peaceful moment, a normal day. Then it happened. A comment, a look, a line meant to sting. Maybe it was subtle. Maybe it was public. Maybe it came from someone who knows exactly which words cut deepest. And you felt it, that spark in your chest, that burn behind your eyes, the urge to clap back, to win, to teach them a lesson. But here's the question. If you respond, what do you win? Proverbs 26 gives us a puzzle. Verse 4 says, "Do not answer a fool according to his folly, or you yourself will be just like him." Then verse 5 says, "Answer a fool according to his folly, or he will be wise in his own eyes." Which is it? It's both. Because wisdom isn't just about knowing what's true. It's knowing when to speak that truth and when to hold it. There are moments when your silence isn't surrender. It's discernment. It's not that you're afraid. It's that you've grown. You've seen this trap before, and this time, you won't step into it. Because not every insult deserves an answer. Not every fool deserves your energy. Not every provocation deserves your peace. Jesus was arrested, dragged before religious leaders, lied about, spat on, beaten. And when they accused him, he gave no answer. He had the truth. He was the truth. And still, he stayed quiet. Because he wasn't there to win the argument. He was there to win eternity. Can you imagine the restraint, the self-control, the strength? We think silence is weakness. But in that moment, silence was power wrapped in flesh. Friend, there will be days when people don't want to understand you. They don't want peace. They want reaction. They want to poke, prod, provoke. And if you give in, you've already lost. Not because they're right, but because they pulled you down to where the enemy fights best: pride, emotion, impulse. But when you stay silent, when you refuse to let your emotions drive the moment, you rise. You rise above the noise. You protect your witness. You honor your God. Because silence in the right moment doesn't ignore truth. It protects it. It keeps sacred things from being thrown into pointless arguments. It keeps wisdom from being trampled in the mud. This doesn't mean we never speak up. It doesn't mean we hide from confrontation. Jesus confronted evil. He called out hypocrisy, but he never argued just to win. He never engaged just to prove a point. And neither should you. Your voice is valuable. Don't waste it on people committed to misunderstanding you. Your time is sacred. Don't spend it fighting battles God never told you to fight. There's a difference between being bold and being baited. You weren't made to live in constant defense. You were made to live in constant peace. So next time someone tries to get a rise out of you, with sarcasm, with slander, with a smirk, pause, ask yourself, is this worth the cost? Is this the fight I was called to fight, or is this the enemy in disguise? Because if the devil can't destroy you, he'll distract you. He'll bait you into wars that waste your words, drain your soul, and rob you of joy. But silence, Spirit-led, Spirit-fed silence, isn't just absence. It's presence. It's proof that you are no longer controlled by the flesh, but led by the Spirit. And that is victory. So when they push, when they prod, when they provoke, don't react. Stand, breathe, remain silent. Because the one who controls their tongue controls the battlefield. And maybe the loudest sound in heaven is the one you refuse to make on earth. It starts quiet, a whisper, a sideways glance, a sentence that begins with, "Did you hear?" You didn't mean to spread anything. You were just sharing, just processing, just talking. But what began as a moment of concern becomes a current pulling you deeper into something holy turned harmful. Proverbs 16:28 says, "A perverse person stirs up conflict, and a gossip separates close friends." And you've seen it, how one conversation becomes a canyon between hearts that once trusted. Because gossip doesn't need lies to be dangerous. It only needs wounded pride and an unchecked tongue. It wears many disguises. I'm just venting. I need prayer for them. I'm only telling you this because I care. But under all of it, a darker truth waits. James 3 warns us, "The tongue is a fire, a world of evil. It sets the whole course of one's life on fire, and is itself set on fire by hell." That's not a metaphor. That's a divine siren. Because the words you release today might burn through the future you never saw coming. You may not see the ripple, the hurt it causes, the trust it destroys, the doors it quietly shuts. But God does. He sees the moment when you could have said nothing, but chose instead to pass along the flame. And He calls you to something higher, not silence born of fear, but silence born of holiness. Because silence can be a shelter, a protection for someone's dignity, a shield between reputation and ruin. It's not about hiding truth. It's about refusing to handle it carelessly. You may know something, you may be right, but the question is, are you righteous? Some of the most Christ-like acts are the ones no one ever hears. When you don't repeat what you overheard, when you choose not to pass it on, when you keep quiet, even when your ego craves revenge through story. Because there's another voice that loves slander, that rejoices when we accuse each other. Revelation calls Him the accuser of the brethren. And when we join that chorus, we don't just sin, we imitate hell. But when we choose silence, when we guard a name instead of expose it, we imitate Christ. Remember Him beaten, spit upon, mocked, insulted, and still, He said nothing. He could have called out every hidden sin, revealed every secret, named every fault. But He came to heal, not to humiliate. And you are called to walk that same path, to cover what others uncover, to be quiet when others shout, to protect when others parade, not because you're weak, but because you fear the Lord more than you crave the last word. So next time your mouth begins to open, pause. Ask, is this helpful? Is this holy? Or is this feeding my flesh? Because truth without love isn't godly, it's gossip. And silence in that moment becomes worship. A quiet no one may praise, but heaven treasures. What if the greatest proof of your spiritual maturity is not how many verses you quote, but which stories you refuse to repeat? Because when your silence guards another's dignity, it builds a bridge back to Eden, where words created life, not destroyed it. So tell me, what stories are you still carrying that God never told you to tell, and whose name needs your silence today? You think you know. You saw something, you heard something, and now your mind is racing, making sense of it, building a story. But do you know the whole story? Or just the part that reached your ears? There's a danger that doesn't look like danger. It feels like insight. It sounds like wisdom, but it's built on assumption. And the Bible calls it what it is, folly. Proverbs 18:13 says, to answer before listening. That is folly and shame. In other words, when you speak without knowing, you dishonor everyone, including yourself. Because premature speech is premature judgment. And judgment without full knowledge isn't justice. It's arrogance dressed as concern. But we live in a world that rewards the fast talker, the hot take, the instant opinion. Silence feels slow. It feels weak. It feels like you're losing ground. But in the kingdom of God, silence is wisdom's first language. Ecclesiastes 5:2 gives this warning. Do not be quick with your mouth. Do not be hasty in your heart to utter anything before God. God is in heaven, and you are on earth, so let your words be few. It reminds us, there's a gap between what we see and what God sees. He sees the hidden motive, the sleepless night, the unspoken wound. You don't. So when someone acts out, or walks away, or makes a decision you don't understand, wait. Don't post, don't vent, don't speculate. Pause. Pray. Let grace speak first. Because silence in the face of mystery is not silence born of fear. That's reverence. Reverence for complexity, for context, for the fact that you are not God. And friend, that's a relief. You weren't built to carry full knowledge. You were built to carry mercy. And mercy holds its tongue until truth reveals itself. Maybe you've been misunderstood before. Maybe someone judged you by the part of your story they saw, not the pain they didn't. And it hurt. So why do it to someone else? Every time you assume without asking, speak without pausing, judge without knowing, you mirror the same wound you once received. But when you stay silent, when you hold space instead of holding court, you break the cycle and you become safe. A safe place, a holy pause, a sanctuary of grace in a world addicted to reaction. You don't have to fill every silence. You don't have to offer a take. You don't have to explain what you don't yet understand. Let your silence become soil, where understanding can grow at heaven's pace. Because once you speak, you can't unsay it. Even if you later learn the truth, your words may have already wounded. So what if you made it your practice to speak only after prayer, to judge only after listening, to post only after peace? Because the tongue is fast, but the spirit is patient. And the one who learns to wait speaks with power. So next time you feel the need to comment, to conclude, to control the narrative, ask yourself, am I building truth or just feeding my need to know? Because silence in the absence of understanding isn't ignorance, it's holiness. And it just might be the doorway to real wisdom. There is a silence that isn't passive. It's sacred, a stillness not of absence, but of awe. You've felt it before. In the hush of a cathedral, in the quiet after a prayer, in the weight of a moment too holy for words. It's the silence that falls when you realize you're not the center. You're not in control. You're not even speaking because someone greater is near. Someone. Habakkuk 2:20 says, "The Lord is in his holy temple. Let all the earth keep silence before him." That's not suggestion. It's command. Because when the king steps into the room, words bow. Ego melts. Speech gives way to stillness. We live in a world that drowns silence in sound. Every moment filled with noise, opinions, entertainment. But the presence of God doesn't shout over the crowd. It whispers in the space we leave empty. And most of us leave very little empty. We come to God with lists, with worries, with speeches. But worship begins not with what you say, but with what you surrender. Ecclesiastes 5:1-2 puts it like this: guard your steps when you go to the house of God. Go near to listen rather than to offer the sacrifice of fools. God is in heaven and you are on earth, so let your words be few. Few words, but full heart. Because stillness isn't nothing. It's everything. It says, you are God. I am not. Speak. I will listen. Think of Moses before the burning bush. He didn't preach. He took off his shoes. Think of Elijah, waiting for God to show up. First came the fire, the wind, the earthquake. But God wasn't in those. Then came a whisper. Think of Job. After chapters of complaint, when God finally speaks, Job's response is silence. He says, I spoke once, but I will speak no more. Because when God truly speaks, the holiest thing you can do is stop. Stillness isn't weakness, it's worship. It says, Lord, I trust you enough not to fill this space with my voice. I believe you're here. And that changes everything. In the presence of royalty, you don't blurt. You bow. And when you approach the throne of heaven, you don't bring noise. You bring reverence. Maybe that's why so many of us struggle to hear God. Because we never stop talking long enough to listen. We want direction, but fill the room with questions. We want peace, but drown it in performance. But if you want to hear his whisper, you must embrace the stillness that makes room for it. So here's the question. When was the last time you sat with God and said nothing? Not a rushed prayer, not a frantic list, just sat, still, silent, and let his presence be enough. Maybe it's been too long. Maybe it's time again to let silence speak louder than song, to let stillness break open your heart in ways words never could. Because when the heavens fall silent, something holy is happening. And when the soul falls silent, something eternal is beginning. There's a kind of silence that doesn't come from reverence, but from love. Not silence before God, silence before another soul. It's not worship this time, it's compassion. James 1:19 says, "Everyone should be quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to become angry." Did you catch the order? Listening comes first. But for most of us, listening is just the space between when the other person stops talking and when we start again. We're not truly hearing, we're preparing our response, our advice, our rebuttal. But love doesn't rush to reply. It lingers, it leans in, it listens. Proverbs 18:2 warns, "Fools find no pleasure in understanding, but delight in airing their own opinions." That's a sobering truth, because sometimes we speak not to heal, but to impress, not to connect, but to control. But the greatest gift you can give someone is your presence undivided, unguarded, unrushed. Think back to your own pain. What helped the most? The long speeches, the clever quotes, the unsolicited advice, or the person who just sat with you, listened, held your hand, and stayed. That's what Jesus did, over and over again. Before he healed, he listened. Before he taught, he looked. The bleeding woman, the blind man, the grieving sisters. He didn't interrupt, he invited. And when he finally spoke, his words healed because his silence had already made space for their hearts to open. You are called to that kind of listening, not the silence of disinterest, but the silence of compassion. Because real listening isn't passive, it's powerful. It's saying, "You matter enough that I'll stop my own story to honor yours." And that kind of silence can save marriages, heal friendships, rebuild trust, open doors the right words never could. But here's the deeper truth. You're not just called to listen to others. You're called to listen to God. And how can you hear Him if every moment is filled with your own voice? Psalm 46:10 says, "Be still and know that I am God." Stillness is the seedbed of knowing. Silence is the soil of divine encounter. You see, when your mouth is full, your ears are often closed. And the Spirit speaks softly to those who wait. So maybe today, before you speak to anyone else, you need to ask, have I listened to the one who speaks with eternity in his voice? Have I made space for the whisper of heaven? Because when you do, everything changes. Your words become gentler, your pace becomes slower, your presence becomes deeper, and people begin to feel not just heard, but held. So, friend, before you answer, before you advise, before you rush in, pause and ask, what if this silence isn't a gap in the conversation, but a gateway to grace? Sometimes silence isn't golden. It's a sin. There are moments when saying nothing isn't holy restraint, it's cowardice. Esther knew that moment. She stood in the palace safe, hidden, far from the cries of her people who were facing annihilation. She hadn't asked for this role. She hadn't sought the crown. But now, everything hung on her voice, and she was afraid. To speak up meant risking her life. To stay silent meant risking a nation. Esther. Mordecai's words to her. If you remain silent at this time, relief and deliverance will arise for the Jews from another place, but you and your father's family will perish. And who knows but that you have come to your royal position for such a time as this? That one sentence cracked the silence wide open. Because silence in that moment would have been complicity. Silence, when truth must be spoken, is not neutral. It's betrayal. The Bible teaches us, There is a time to stay silent and a time to speak. And when injustice rises, when lives are on the line, when God's truth is at stake, your silence becomes your sin. Jesus knew this too. He was silent before his accusers, but never before injustice. He turned tables. He confronted corruption. He spoke truth to power, even when it cost him everything. So must we? Because there's a lie many believe, that peace is the absence of conflict. But sometimes peace is born in the fire of a righteous confrontation. Your voice matters not because it's loud, but because it carries the echo of divine justice. Proverbs 31:8 commands, "Speak up for those who cannot speak for themselves, for the rights of all who are destitute." Speak up and judge fairly. Defend the rights of the poor and needy. Did you hear that? Speak up twice. Because silence in the face of suffering is not peace. It's permission. And God does not call his children to comfort at the cost of courage. Esther risked her crown to fulfill her calling. And so must you. Because you were placed where you are. In your workplace, in your school, in your community, in your generation. For such a time as this. To speak when others hide. To stand when others kneel. To name truth when lies are popular. And yes, it will cost you. It might cost your reputation, your platform, your approval, but it will never cost you your soul. Because when you speak truth in love, you are not just resisting evil, you are revealing God. So let me ask, what injustice has your silence been enabling? What truth have you been afraid to say? And what would happen if today you stepped out like Esther? Not because you feel brave, but because you know your voice was never meant to be hidden. The book of Revelation opens with silence. Not the kind that comforts, the kind that unsettles. Revelation 8:1 says, when he opened the seventh seal, there was silence in heaven for about half an hour. Silence. In heaven. A realm of constant praise. A realm where seraphim cry, holy, holy, holy day and night. And yet, silence. Why? Because judgment was about to begin. Because the scroll had been opened. Because something so sacred, so catastrophic, so final, was unfolding that even heaven held its breath. This silence wasn't peace. It was preparation. It wasn't hesitation. It was holy pause. And here's the truth. You will face moments like that. Moments where the weight of what's coming demands reverence, not reaction. Moments when you feel the trembling in your soul that tells you speak now, or forever lose the chance to speak truth. These are the crossroads where silence and speech are not just choices. They are testimonies. Will you tremble and remain voiceless? Or will you tremble and speak anyway? Because silence in those moments is not neutral. It's a verdict. And God is watching. Too often we think courage means noise. But real courage is the sound your heart makes. Right before your voice breaks the silence. With something holy. Esther stood in that silence. You will too. And the cost of that moment is real. But so is the reward. Because when you choose to break the silence for God's glory, heaven does not remain still. When Esther spoke, a nation was saved. When Jesus cried out, "It is finished," hell was broken. When you speak as he leads with love, with truth, with trembling grace, you are not alone. All of heaven stands behind you. And the silence that once held judgment now echoes with redemption. So, friend, what silence are you being called to break? What injustice sits quietly? Because your voice has not yet shaken the stillness. You were born for such a silence-shattering moment. You were placed here to speak with courage. And though your voice may shake, let it shake the gates of hell. Because when the silence ends and your words align with God's heart, eternity listens. There's a kind of silence that protects, that guards, that heals. It's the silence you choose when you don't know the whole story. And let's be honest, We rarely do, but that doesn't stop us from filling in the gaps, drawing conclusions, making judgments based on fragments. It's quick, it's easy, and it's deadly. Proverbs 18:13 warns to answer before listening. That is folly and shame. In other words, speaking before knowing reveals more about us than it does about the situation. It exposes our pride, our impatience, our craving for control. Because let's face it, we don't like the unknown, we don't like waiting, so we speak. And in doing so, we often speak wrong. We wound with assumptions. We injure with incomplete truths. We destroy trust with a word spoken too soon. But wisdom doesn't rush. Ecclesiastes 5:2 echoes this. Do not be quick with your mouth. Do not be hasty in your heart to utter anything before God. God is in heaven and you are on earth, so let your words be few. Few words, slow words, measured words. That's not cowardice, it's humility. Because the truth is, you and I don't see the whole picture. We see moments, slices, shadows. But God sees the heart, the history, the reasons behind the reaction. And when we pretend to know what only God knows, we are not wise. We are playing God. Maybe someone in your life did something unexpected, pulled away, acted strangely, made a decision that hurt. And your first instinct was to assume the worst, to share your version, to process it with others. But what if instead you paused? What if you chose silence over suspicion? What if you honored the story you haven't yet heard? That kind of silence doesn't make headlines. It doesn't feel satisfying, but it builds something stronger than vindication. It builds grace. Because silence in the absence of full knowledge isn't retreat. It's reverence. It says, I will not speak until I've sought understanding, until I've prayed, until I've asked, not assumed. It says I would rather be quiet than be cruel. Friend, have you ever been misjudged? Then you know the sting of careless conclusions. So don't be the one to inflict that pain on someone else. Instead, be the one who waits, who listens, who speaks only when love and truth can walk hand in hand. Because when we choose that silence, we make room for the voice of God to speak what we could never see. Silence, when you don't know the full story, is more than restraint, it's honor. It honors the complexity of people. It honors the timing of truth. It honors the God who knows every hidden thing. But sometimes our desire to know outpaces our readiness to love. We pry. We speculate. We process with friends what we haven't prayed about with God. And in the rush to be informed, we become misinformed. We confuse curiosity with compassion, but curiosity digs for details. Compassion covers in grace. And here's the danger. Once a word leaves your lips, it cannot be recalled. Even if you regret it, even if it's retracted, the damage may linger in someone's reputation, in someone's trust, in someone's story. That wasn't yours to tell. Proverbs 10:19 says, when words are many, sin is not absent, but he who holds his tongue is wise. Wisdom doesn't rush to speak. Wisdom waits. It asks, do I know enough to say this? Is this mine to share? Will this build or break? And if the answer is uncertain, then silence becomes a sanctuary. It's not passive. It's protective. It guards your own soul from pride and presumption, and it guards the other person's dignity, even when they're not present to defend themselves. This kind of silence is not silence from fear. It's silence from reverence, because you know that every word will one day be weighed. Jesus said in Matthew chapter 12:36, on the day of judgment, people will give account for every careless word they speak. Every careless word. Not just every cruel word, every careless one. The quick comment, the rushed conclusion, the whispered speculation. That should make us pause, not in shame, but in awe. Because silence is not just the absence of speech, It's the presence of wisdom. It's the soil where love grows deeper roots. It's the space where truth has time to rise without being trampled by opinion. So, friend, the next time you feel the urge to comment, to explain, to assume, stop, breathe, ask, is this silence a space where God is working? And if it is, then wait. Because when you wait with Him, you'll see that what you didn't say can be just as holy as what you one day will. Some of the most powerful moments you will ever live through will not be the ones where you speak. They will be the moments when you simply listen, not with your ears alone, but with your whole heart. In a world that runs on noise, listening feels rare, radical, revolutionary. Because real listening requires surrender. It means laying down your agenda, silencing your inner script, stopping the reflex to fix. Explain, advise, respond. James 1:19 says, everyone should be quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to become angry. Notice the order. Listening comes first, before truth, before correction, before action. Because listening is how love breathes. It's how wounds are honored, how stories are heard before they're judged. But too often, we're not listening. We're waiting to talk. We hear enough to interrupt, enough to insert ourselves, enough to turn the spotlight back, but not enough to carry someone's pain with tenderness. Proverbs 18:2 warns, fools find no pleasure in understanding, but delight in airing their own opinions. That one verse could summarize half our conversations. But Jesus, He was different. He didn't just speak truth, He listened for hearts. When people came to Him, with questions, with wounds, with doubts, He didn't lecture. He looked, He lingered, He listened. And then, with few words, He touched what they thought was beyond healing. He invites us to do the same. To stop rushing conversations like transactions. To stop seeing listening as passive. Because real listening is ministry. It's presence. It's compassion. It's a form of worship. When you sit with someone and let them unravel, not so you can fix them, but so they can breathe. That silence is sacred. It says, you matter more than my reply. I'm not here to control this moment. I'm here to carry it with you. And sometimes, that's the closest some people will ever come to knowing what the love of God feels like. Listening is not silence by accident. It's silence on purpose. It's a choice to let another voice be heard without interruption, without judgment. And it's harder than it sounds. Because when someone opens their heart, you'll be tempted to jump in, to fix the theology, to reframe the pain, to wrap it all in a Bible verse before the tears have even fallen. But what if your silence could do more than your sermon? What if your presence was the miracle they needed? Because sometimes people don't need answers. They need empathy. They don't need correction. They need connection. And you, just by listening, can become the doorway to that grace. Romans 12:15 says, mourn with those who mourn. Not correct, not convince, not compare your own story. Just mourn. That means being quiet enough to let someone else's grief have space to breathe. It means sitting in the ashes with them, not trying to sweep them away too soon. And this isn't just about human relationships. It's about God. Because if we fill every quiet moment with our own voice, how will we ever hear His? Psalm 46:10 says, be still and know that I am God. Stillness makes room for knowing. Silence makes room for revelation. God rarely shouts over our noise. He speaks in whispers, and whispers require quiet. So, friend, if your soul feels overwhelmed, if the world feels deafening, don't rush to speak. Don't fill the silence with noise that numbs. Be still. Let your heart rest in the hush of His presence, and let others find refuge in your listening. Because when you learn to listen, really listen, you reflect the heart of Jesus. You become the quiet place where weary hearts can finally be heard. And that silence, though no one else may see it, is holy. There is a kind of silence that exposes, not because of what it hides, but because of what it reveals. It's the silence you choose when your life doesn't match your words. And in that moment, when the urge rises to say the right thing, to sound spiritual, to look strong, but your heart is fractured, your soul is tired, your obedience is delayed, that's when silence becomes honesty. Proverbs 17:28 says, "Even a fool is thought wise if he keeps silent, and discerning if he holds his tongue." Why? Because silence keeps you from saying what you don't live. It stops you from quoting scripture you haven't submitted to, from giving advice you haven't followed, from preaching boldness you haven't yet chosen. And that restraint, that pause, is not weakness, it's wisdom. It's integrity. Because too many voices say the right things from the wrong place. They echo truth without embodying it. And slowly, the words lose weight. Not because the truth is weak, but because the vessel is inconsistent. Jesus warned us, "By your words you will be acquitted, and by your words you will be condemned." Matthew 12:37. That's not poetry. That's eternity. Every phrase, every polished speech, every religious performance. God sees not just what we say, but why we say it, and whether our lives confirm or contradict it. So in that quiet moment, when you realize your lips have outrun your living, pause. Don't fake strength. Don't pretend to believe what you're not walking out. Just be silent, because that silence, though painful, is sacred. It's the space where repentance begins. It's the space where God gently whispers, "Before you speak to others, let me speak to you." And that changes everything. Because when you let your silence become surrender, God meets you there. Not to shame you, but to shape you. To speak what your mouth wasn't ready to carry. To purify what your heart had hidden. That kind of silence isn't a pause in the performance. It's the end of pretending, and the beginning of becoming real. You don't need to be perfect to speak truth, but you do need to speak from truth, from a place of humility, of honesty, of alignment with the Spirit. Because once your life and your lips finally agree, then your words will carry a weight no volume could ever achieve. People will hear not just your voice, but your faith. Not just your vocabulary, but your virtue. They will hear the silence that came before the sound, and they will trust it. Friend, if your soul is out of sync with what you're saying, don't keep talking. Let your silence do the soul work. Let it draw you back to the feet of Jesus. Let it become the quiet confession that says, "Lord, I want my words to be yours again." Because when your speech is surrendered, even your silence becomes worship. There is a holy tension between silence and speech, a sacred balance where both can glorify God if they are surrendered. Because silence isn't always righteous and speaking isn't always wrong. There is a time to hold your tongue in reverent restraint, and a time to raise your voice in spirit-led boldness. A time to stay quiet when anger burns, when pride swells, when understanding is incomplete. And a time to speak for the voiceless, for the broken, for the truth. And the only way to know the difference is not through a rule book, but through a relationship. A relationship with the Holy Spirit who teaches us, moment by moment, how to love with our lips, how to worship in our silence, how to speak when the time is right. When. So maybe today, God is inviting you into a different kind of communication. Not just to say less, but to listen more, to discern, to reflect, to ask, "Lord, do these words belong to you?" Because your voice, though it may feel small, carries power when it is anchored in Him. So whether you're in a season of silence or a moment of testimony, may your words and your withholding be drenched in grace. And may you remember, when your heart belongs to God, Your mouth will follow, and even your silence can preach a sermon heaven will honor. Thank you for walking through this journey of sacred silence and holy speech. If this message stirred something in your heart, if it made you pause, reflect, or simply breathe deeper, know this: you are not alone. Week after week, we gather in this quiet space to search the scriptures, to examine the soul, to ask better questions, and wait for heaven's whisper. And that journey, we'll keep walking it together. So I hope you'll return. I hope you'll sit with us again. There is more to explore, more to surrender, more to become. Until then, may your silence be filled with wisdom, your words soaked in grace, and your heart ever listening for the voice that truly matters. God bless you, and may peace go with you, even in the quiet.